Ruben from SUPboarder back here to give you some information on iSUPs, and in particularly we've had a few questions are what iSUP is the best iSUP to buy, and also what iSUP thickness is the best iSUP to look at. But before we do that, we have to go back and have a look at the iSUP history. So in around 2008, when most iSUPs were coming of age, most iSUPs were only available in a 4-inch in thickness, 100mm. And then from then, in about 2012, they became available in a 6-inch thickness too. And then from now and up until now, they're available in anything from 8 inches to 4 3/4 inch to 5 inches to many different thicknesses in between. So very much started at the 4-inch, and now it's very much at the established 4 3/4, which is what this board is here, and also the 6-inch, which is like this board here. So why the big change? What was wrong with the old 4-inch? Well, there is nothing wrong with the old 4-inch, and they still exist today. But if you take a 4-inch board compared to a 6-inch board, inflate it at the same pressure, let's say 15 psi, the 6-inch board will be stiffer. For example, if we take these two RRDs, which are exactly the same, they are two RRD Air SUPs V2. We did a full test on these a year back. I'll put a link on the screen now if you want to have a look at these great boards. This is a 4 3/4 inch thick one, so 120mm, and this is a 6-inch one, so 150mm. And if we put them through our deflection test, which is where we put a boards on a gap of 1.5 meters apart and a weight of 75 kilograms in the center, you can see that the 4 3/4 inch board dropped 20mm, and the 6-inch board only dropped 10mm. So there is a 10mm difference in that board a thickness, and yes, they are both at 15 psi pressure. So you can clearly see there that a thicker board has less deflection, or is a stiffer board in general than a thinner board. And this is the main reason why paddleboard companies back in the early days of the iSUPs jumped onto the thickness bandwagon and started making iSUPs in different thicknesses. It became a lot easier to achieve a stiffer board without the same psi or less psi with a thicker board. So if all we need out of an iSUP is it to be stiff, a thick iSUP is the way to go, correct? No, it's not always the case. You might find that there are pluses and minuses to each iSUP and their thickness. What we do is we go over some pluses and minuses of each one right now. Let's look at the pros of a thick iSUP first. The first major one, obviously they are stiffer at a lower PSI or equivalent PSI of a thinner board. They can take more weight, they can carry more weight across the board, and they're great for heavier riders. And also they're a much drier board because the board is thicker, you're higher out the water, so you have a much drier ride. Let's have a look at the cons of a thick iSUP. It's going to take more air to pump up a thick iSUP to 15 psi as it would do a thinner iSUP to 15 psi. That's because there's more volume in it. There's more volume, so you need more air. That's a downside. The other downside is they're bigger and they're bulkier. They're a little bit harder, cumbersome to move around, thicker to carry under your hand, a bit more awkward, and a little bit heavier just to move around on the beach. They are not so good in the surf because they have such a wide, thick rail. The thicker the rail board, the harder it is to push into the wave and to give the wave grip, and it tends to pop out on you. You can feel detached from the paddling experience. A bit of a strange one to explain, but when you're paddling on a 6-inch board or a thicker board, you're generally higher up, you're out of the water, your paddle might have to be slightly longer. It's not such a nice feeling as a 4-inch board or a board that you are slightly lower in the water with your rails in the water. It's a slightly strange one to explain, but feeling detached from your board is definitely one of them. And the other one is it is completely wasted on a lighter rider. If you are a lighter rider of say 75 kilograms and down, a thick board is a bit of a waste for you. You're just going to be standing on top of it and it's going to give you loads of stability, which might be great, but you'd also get the same amount of stability on a 4 3/4 inch or a 4-inch thick board too. Moving on to the pros of the thinner board, the 4 3/4 inch, which we have here. It is quicker to pump up to PSI, doesn't take so long. It has a much better rail shape performance, so if you wanted to go surf and stuff like that, it will react much better in the surf. It's much more user friendly for a lighter rider, easier to carry, move around, smaller go in the bag and stuff like that. The cons of the thinner iSUP, it is obviously not as stiff as the 6-inch at the same PSI. The other con is if you want to go above the 15 psi pressure to get the equivalent stiffness as you would do in the thicker board, you need more pressure and more pump power to get that up there at the higher pressure. And that is if the board is actually recommended to take that higher pressure. Things to remember when buying an iSUP is anybody can make a thick iSUP stiff, but it's very hard, and usually it's only the top end brands that make a thin iSUP stiff. So just remember that. When it comes to board stiffness, build quality and materials used, they are fundamental to achieving a stiff, good quality iSUP. Obviously, when we're looking at a good quality top end brand like RRD, they put a lot of R&D into these boards And these boards, for example, have even got like a sandwich Dyneema belt running down the top and the middle of the board to help add that extra bit of stiffness to the board. Even probably the thinnest RRD iSUP that's on the market will outperform the thickest, cheaper iSUP that's on the market. So that's just stuff to bear in mind. In summary, there are pros and cons to thicker and thinner iSUP, but it is important to remember, as well as considering board thickness, it is also important to consider other factors such as materials, respectability of the brand, and other feedback from paddleboarders out there to find the best iSUP that suits you. Hope you found this SUPboarder video interesting and informative, and for other great SUP news, interesting independent reviews and worldwide features, visit supboardermag.com.